to get started with this, the last webinar of this, the last scheduled webinar of this, of the fiscal year for the Supported Employment Grant here at Utah State University. And we're excited to have Emily and Janice return from Total Link to Community to present on job coach fading, which is a really important piece of this whole employment puzzle for people with disabilities. So once again, if you need to ask a question, you can use the chat box. Just type in your questions. I've included the PowerPoints down below. You can download or upload the PowerPoint file. And there's a couple of web links on your right-hand side of your page. One is called Daniel and one is called Aaron. And we tried to show video using this platform, and we weren't very successful, so we just included the web links that you can watch at a different time. Also, because this is the last webinar in this series, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to put up a poll, or I'm going to ask you guys to indicate topics for future webinars, because I'm going to start scheduling those here shortly. So I'll just put up a quick poll. But I'm going to turn the time over to Emily and Janice to give their presentation on job coach fading. So welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Hi everyone, thanks for having us.
Yes, good afternoon. We're glad to be back. And we will just very briefly reintroduce ourselves. We're hoping that some of you were with us a couple months ago. And a little bit of background, I think, will help to explain how we got to this place where we have decided to create plans that intentionally help us create a vision for what a job should look like for our clients when we go in. Because in the state of Illinois, one of the things that we struggle with is getting the financial resources to support people with job coaching. So briefly, we're a 501c3 where we consider ourselves a small grassroots agency. Just got our 501c3 a little over 2 years ago, and I'm one of the founding members, and I'm the executive director now. And for the last 3 years, we've been using Griffin-Hammett's model of customized employment, and we've also added some things based on the needs that we've found our clients have, and we work with mainly with young adults who are either in transition or recently graduated from transition, in supporting them in inclusive workplace settings. And for most of them, we've created a customized position. And what we want to do today is share with you information about what we have learned along the way, lessons we've learned, and we'll do that by presenting 3 different individuals that we've worked with. And they've gone from having full support at their job to having limited support or just technical support from us. So we're very much strength-based. Everyone that we work with, we go in with the assumption that there's a job for everyone. So we won't go into too much about that because we know that most of you are familiar with customized employment. One of the other projects that we've been working on is something called the BIP initiative, or the Rebalancing Initiative project with the state of Illinois. And there are, I think, 19 agencies in the state who received funding, and customized employment then, now is really something that everyone in our state should be familiar with, especially those that are part of the Department of Rehabilitative Services. And under this project, we've taken salient aspects of the IPS supported employment model and kind of tack them onto what we do with customized employment. So I think some of that may come through as we talk. One of the things we do is we develop a very specific follow-along support plan for people, and that's something that we've created based on our work with IPS.
So today our main focus will be talking about the role of the job coach and how the job coach can help the client build independence within their place of employment, and how the job coach can also help the business build capacity for their new employee or the client that we're working with. So today you might hear us refer to building natural supports, and our definition of a natural support is simply any coworker in the business that is helpful. Each of us have those natural supports in our daily work. If I have a question, I know that I can go to Janice, and she's a natural support to help me.
But more so, Emily is a natural support to me because I have technological challenges. So I'm very lucky that she's a natural support for me. So
yeah, and within our work, it might be easy for us to build those for ourselves. And so part of the role of the job coach is to help our clients build those natural supports for themselves at work. We'll be talking about fading techniques to help the clients reach their highest level of independence. And we'll also be talking about how to encourage self-advocacy, breaking down tasks, what we refer to as systematic instruction, and how to implement any adaptations or modifications or visual supports that might help aid the client in becoming successful at work. So we just want everyone to keep in mind that job coaching is really a dynamic process. The job coach could be on site and really hands-on for the first couple of tasks that the client is working on, and then it could fade for the next half hour of the client's job. So the job coach support doesn't have to look the same throughout a client's or job seeker's shift the entire time, but can more or less be a dynamic process and can also involve the help or aid of the other coworkers at the place of business. And just to keep in mind that our client that we're helping support can also get help or feedback from their coworkers as well. So it's really a group effort in helping the client build capacity for independence. And so just to keep in mind that job coaching role is really twofold. It's one, yes, to help the clients learn their responsibilities, and it's also to help teach the business how to best support the individual or their new employee.
Okay, so we're going to be talking a lot about one of our first clients, named Daniel. He will give you a little bit of background about Daniel. I think when I think about Daniel, one of the first things I think about is that he is energetic and he is vibrant. He's got a lot of skills, but when you first meet him, because he likes to move around a lot and he speaks in kind of a loud voice, that's the first thing that I think you notice. So naturally, that's part of what we had to take into account when we were trying to find or create a position for Daniel. So he came to us with a lot of terrific experiences, work experiences, and then recreational experiences. He was an assistant clerk with the police department in the town where he lives, and he has had a variety of experiences helping children in a recreational program center. So he's got some excellent math skills. He can add figures in his head, and he's just certain things when he does certain things, he's so efficient, and once he learns a skill, he learns it so quickly, and that's another thing to keep in mind. So we really needed to be careful that whatever Daniel learned, we didn't want him to learn it in the wrong way, so that we have to kind of backtrack and undo, because once he's in a kind of a set routine, he likes to keep that routine. So just a little bit of background about Daniel.
And as we were getting to know Daniel, we developed some vocational themes or for areas that we would really focus our career or job development on. And those themes were sports, numbers, performing, and in the food industry. Because it's where we saw the most skills and the most interest for Daniel. We learned that he had a really good stamina for work. He, like Janice described, he has a lot of energy and he's able to sustain a long day and used to being quite active. He's the ability to learn complex tasks given a set routine or guidance. So having those tasks broken down and clearly identified the key steps of those routines. And he'd had experience, like Janice had said, filing in a police department. Some support needs that we knew that he would benefit him in the workplace would be having a go-to person, so a person to ask questions to or check in with, a checklist, and written step-by-step directions. So as we were doing our job development with Daniel, his father actually approached us and said the company that he was working for is kind of a unique company. They operate out in a townhome and they manage various other properties in the north suburbs of Chicago. And their office manager was really getting bogged down by the tasks of filing or opening up the mail or paying the bills for each of these separate properties, and that she could really benefit from having an extra set of hands with those responsibilities.
Yeah, so it was basically a one-person office with other people kind of coming and going. And to explain the extent of the filing tasks that she has, really complex, very organized, very highly organized office, but the filing tasks were really complex with lots of company names that were similar and documents that needed to be filed very specifically in chronological order with how many filing cabinets in the garage?
I mean, at least 20.
Yeah, or more. So yeah.
And so
with probably daily filing that had to be done. I would say.
And just to give an example, there would be a ComEd bill for each of the 15 properties that this company owned. So ComEd bill looks very similar, but there'd be 15 of them at least for each different property. So I, myself, and Daniel met with the company to learn further about their needs and what the responsibilities looked like, and in order to help develop some idea of what would be needed to teach Daniel these tasks. We also met with the company to identify which of their needs would fit Daniel's skill set and to develop a work routine. So Daniel started working for the group, and the first phase of job coaching was really one-to-one support for Daniel to teach him the daily responsibilities. So developing a routine, so introducing Daniel what his work would look like when he came in to work every day. So he would do things like open the mail, sort the mail, file, pay the bills, and label each folder. And we worked with the office manager to give Daniel the tasks in a work bin so that they were all organized according to each task. And we taught Daniel to come in and to look at each project and to organize his workspace. We decided that it was best for Daniel to be able to stand up and do his work because he did have all this energy and like to move around. So we worked it out with the business for Daniel to complete his tasks at the kitchen counter. They kind of have like an island in the kitchen, and for him to stand at the kitchen counter and do his work so that he was able to move around and get out that energy while
Yeah, and the space, and then the layout of the space with all that countertop space, I think really enabled you, Emily, to create these systems for him, and even to back up and say that I think you also worked pretty closely with the key support person who runs the office to help her know how she can organize those tasks that he has. Just enough bins so that he could take, maybe there were, we say like 3 bins or so, and then all that paperwork then Daniel was able to organize and categorize by himself. So I hope that helps you to be able to create a picture in your mind of what the workspace looks like. But there's a nice space with bins that are labeled, and then lots of space for Daniel to take that paperwork and then organize it even more so that he could start to see in his mind where all these things are going to be, when there were bills that need to be paid and when there were things that need to be filed, things that need to be photocopied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the web link of Daniel will show you the his workspace area, and will show him completing one of the tasks. So if you're curious what that looks like at a later point in time, you can click on the link to learn more about what that looks like. So the second phase of the job coaching took place once we noticed that Daniel had mastered some of the tasks. He picked up on parts of the filing work pretty fast and the opening of the mail task pretty fast. So once we saw that Daniel had could complete these responsibilities without any corrections or any questions during those specific tasks, I took a step back from. So we had Daniel complete those tasks first in his routine, and I would sit in the other room or be out of eyesight, and then eventually show up, 15 or 20 or half an hour into Daniel's shift. So he would arrive first, and then I would arrive after him. During this time of the 4 to 6 weeks and during phase 2, we noticed that, or we got feedback from Sonia, Daniel's main support go person or natural support at work, said, when Daniel has a question, he's shouting from the other room to ask me, and sometimes I'm on the phone, or I would really like to work on that with Daniel. How can we develop a line of communication so that Daniel isn't shouting from the other room? And so that was another key thing that we worked on during this time. And Daniel's a very literal guy, so when you explain to Daniel that it comes off a bit rude or inappropriate to yell, he became mindful of going in, stopping his work, walking into the next room, and asking Sonia those questions. During this time, we also developed a few different decision trees for Daniel to use to provide a natural means for him to ask himself questions about his work. And they were the same kinds of questions that I found myself asking him as his job coach or his support person.
Those were, I think that some of those were the kinds of questions that he would ask Sonia. So if he saw something and he was uncertain about what he should do, and tell me if I'm wrong, Emily, but I think I could say, I need help. I need help. So the decision tree was a support for him that helped him to think before he would ask Sonia. So they think that was another real helpful part of the support that we set up by creating a decision tree, because Daniel has a great ability to problem solve. And it was a great way to help him become very independent.
And we, a few slides down, will show you an example of the problem of the decision tree, but another key part of that was teaching Sonia how to use the decision tree as well.
Okay.
So that if Daniel was asking a question, Sonia could say, well, let's look at your decision tree. What does it tell you to do? And so that Sonia was giving him feedback to refer back to the decision tree so that Daniel could solve these problems on his own as well. And during that last 2 weeks of the 4 to 6 week period during phase 2, I was really stepping back to be out of sight so that I was available if Sonia or Daniel needed it, but they had the opportunity to really collaborate together or work together without necessarily having me there for any indicators or any assistance.
Yeah, I think that that is so important because we want to remove ourselves from the environment, but be available if a problem comes up, so that we're not embedded in the routine. So, really intentionally removing yourself from the environment is a real important thing to do while you're in their job coaching, because you want to see what not only what issues come up for your job seeker, but you also want to see that problem solving beginning to happen with the natural support at the workplace.
And I see that, Ellen, you've raised your hand. I think you have a question. Would you mind typing it into the chat so that we can answer it for you? So here's an example of the decision tree. So Daniel would come into work and he would have a basket and it would have all of these different tasks within it. So he would take out the stack and he would sort it into these piles, and it would either be mail to be opened, bills that needed to be paid, things to be filed, miscellaneous, or maybe it was paperwork that he had questions about. So this decision tree helped Daniel organize his workspace. And then we created a decision tree for each task that Daniel completed. So here's mail to be opened. You know, sometimes it was bank statements or bills to be paid or miscellaneous. So from all the mail that he was, opening, he would create three separate piles. And with Daniel, it was important to give examples of different bank names that he would come across, like Wells Fargo or JP Morgan Chase, because different banks weren't necessarily a regular part of Daniel's vocabulary at this point. Right. He was unfamiliar with it.
And he picked it up. He picked it up rather quickly. Once he had something visual in front of him, that really helped him to organize that information and become familiar with it.
And then in the video of Daniel that I hope you'll all look at a later point in time, you'll see Daniel completing the task of paying bills. So I think it's so common for each of us to know that we get a bill, and some of them we have to tear off the perforated edge, put it back in the envelope. Some bills come in the form of an invoice so that there's no tearing off a perforated edge, but for documenting for your own records, you'll probably make a copy of that invoice, so you can send the copy of an invoice back along with your check. And so this was the task that, one of the tasks that has multiple steps to it that doesn't look the same each time, that Daniel learned to do within the office, and was a huge help to Sonia, because it's time consuming. It's time consuming to, put the matching check with the matching invoice sheet back in the envelope, to make a copy of it all, to then go and file it in their filing system, closing the envelope, to putting the stamp on. And so this was a huge help to the company.
Okay, so we're on to our next client. This is a client that we have learned so much from. So we would like to give you a little bit of background information about her and how she ended up getting this particular job. So this was a referral to us from the DRS transition counselor. And this young lady had an internship, a really great internship at the headquarters of a major corporation here, based out of Northbrook. And she had been there for 3 years, And she also happened to be going there with a personal support worker from the transition program that she attended. And when she left school, there was talk about her potentially being hired by this company, but it took a while for this to happen. And I think all along they had hoped that this is what would happen, but this all had to go through upper levels of human resources at this corporation, and these things take time in this kind of setting. Anyway, she's a very shy young lady. It takes quite a long while to build up a rapport and to develop a relationship with her that will even allow her to feel comfortable enough to open up to you and to talk to you. So a little bit about Stacy. And she ended up being hired by this company, but this all happened kind of through those connections those naturally existing connections before we were fully involved. So when we came on board, we really spent the time kind of getting to know what she had been doing in the 3 years while she was volunteering. And I think that the company imagined seeing Stacy doing most of the things that she had been doing beforehand. The tricky piece of this was we didn't find out until we got into the site that a lot of the work that she was doing with the personal support worker or the job coach. So I'm gonna remind you what we talked about in Daniel's case, where we don't want to be embedded in the routine. So unfortunately, what had happened is the job coach was embedded in the routine, and Stacy was very reliant on the job coach. So,
and not only was Stacy very reliant on the job coach, but the corporate headquarters had developed such a close relationship with the job coach as well that they were reliant on the job coach. And we'll get into a little bit more of what that looked like. But it was really, this job coach had made herself
part of the family, pretty much part of the family, which you want to see. We want to see our clients become part of the culture of the workplace. But because Stacy was so shy, it almost felt like the job coach was the main player there.
Right. Yeah. So instead of helping Stacy to build the relationship between her and her coworkers, the relationship was built between the job coach and Stacy and the job coach and the corporate headquarters. So when Stacy was hired, she'd been doing tasks like mail delivery and special projects on an as-needed basis. And as Janice had mentioned, those special projects were done in tandem with the job coach. So Stacy would work on those special projects with her one-on-one support. So we kind of ran through some of these points as to Stacy when she was with the transition program and then turning into the paid position after she graduated. And it was Total Link became involved or started helping to support Stacy after she'd graduated from her transition program. So that's when we came into the mix. And one of the first things that we did with the corporate headquarters was we worked with them to develop a new job description for Stacy, because the one that she had been given was very vague and wasn't necessarily written in a way that Stacy could read it and understand what was expected of her within her role.
Yeah, or I mean, honestly, I think we even had a hard time understanding what her role was. And if you met Stacy, I think it becomes really clear once you meet her that in order for her to be successful, she really needs to know very specifically what's expected of her. So that was one of the first tasks, was creating a job description that would help us to create a routine, a meaningful work routine where she would eventually become independent.
And talking with a company about something like a job description is a great way to kind of start that conversation about the skill set of their employee and what aligns with their strengths. So when we started working with Stacy during the first month, we really used that as our time to assess what projects were a good fit for her and what tasks around the building matched her skill set. And once we had identified those, we were able to create a routine for Stacy.
That would lend itself to independence, basically. I mean, that was really the task at hand. So we really didn't have a chance to do a true discovery with her, but we did. But because there were so many different departments that brought special projects to her supervisor, it kind of was an opportunity for us to see where her skills lied and what her support, the level of support was. Actually, that was tricky. Figuring out the level of support was tricky because there were things that she wasn't willing to do on her own because she really enjoyed working with her job coach and she missed her job coach. So that was also part of it. So we were very intentional about, again, stepping away so we could see what she could do on her own. And that really was such an important part of those first couple months.
And then during the second month, we were able to take what we learned and start a discussion with the corporate headquarters about that. So we could say, oh, when Stacy was doing this project, it was great how this coworker was able to answer her questions or provide her support, and able to really talk with the company about roles or who could naturally support her moving forward.
So this was another thing that we've discovered and wanted to share with you, just so that because you could potentially, any one of us could potentially find ourselves in this position where the company really thought that Stacy was a package deal with a job coach. So there was a lot of discussion on the part of our employment specialist to help the company understand that Stacy really could be independent. It was just going to be a matter of kind of going back through this company and looking at things that would help them to become more efficient by plugging Stacy in to do certain things. So actually the mailroom task that she did was one really great task that she had learned that was easy to continue to implement. But the employment specialist really kind of went through this company to see where there were places that matched her skill set and that certain tasks could be taken off the plates of other administrative assistants throughout the company.
So the other web link titled Erin is the employment specialist that worked with Stacy is working with Stacy in the corporate headquarters, and the video is an interview of Erin and helpful steps that she took during this process and things that she learned. And one of the biggest challenges that Erin helped Stacy in the corporate headquarters work through is this line of communication. So she really developed when the corporate headquarters had a project or a task for Stacy to work on, that was communicated directly to Stacy and didn't necessarily need to go through Erin first, which was a change for both Stacy and the corporate headquarters. She also made a work binder for Stacy and the corporate headquarters that had each project written out with directions. And this was a great tool for Stacy's coworkers to refer to. And her coworkers actually were the ones then that would write out the directions and give them to Stacy to add to her binder when they had new projects for her to work on.
Yeah, and maybe it'd be helpful for us to kind of explain what the nature of some of these projects are. So sometimes for large events, she might need to assemble a folder with a variety of pamphlets and things. So there would be directions, step-by-step directions, but then also a sample. so that she had a sample to refer to. Other times there were tasks that were pretty required kind of some tedious scanning of documents and finding like certain numbers that on a document, and those needed to be highlighted so that they could be that data could be put into the system, later on. So she really had a kind of a nice wide variety of projects that she did, but because of the inconsistency of some of these things, the tasks would change. She might work on something for a couple months, and then she would shift to something that was really very different. So having that binder is very helpful.
So during the 4th month, really strengthening and outlining the strategies that are helpful when working with Stacy to build that independence. So one of those things, like we mentioned, was writing down the step-by-step directions or modeling how to build the packet and providing an example. Another thing that Stacy did was she was given her own workspace, her own cubicle, where she put up pictures of herself and her family, and when working with a new coworker to help warm up and get to know the new coworker, she would have the coworker meet her at her desk to go over the directions, and that way Stacy could say, like, here's a picture of my dog, or her coworker could say, that's a cute dog, I have a dog. And so they could find some common grounds to build comfort in a relationship.
Mm-hmm. So it has taken some time to really develop independence. So we went from full job coaching for the 3 hours that Stacy's at her job, and she has such a wide variety of tasks that she does that there are some days. The first day, so she works on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now Tuesdays, she is in a place where her employment specialist and her supervisor and her mother and Stacy feel confident that she can work independently. So she just had her first fully independent day this last Tuesday. So she's gone from needing 6 hours of job coaching a week to now needing about 1.5 hours of job coaching. And the job coach who's there for that 1.5 hours doesn't need to be really with her fully for that whole time. So she's able to do other things and step away. And really is more, I think, a comfort level in case something arises for the supervisor at this point.
And to encourage that fading, the employment specialist, Erin, has set up check-ins with Stacy's supervisor every 2 weeks, and then over the phone check-in, and then a once a month face-to-face check-in, so that they can collaborate and talk about how the past month has gone or how the past couple of weeks have gone, so that the job coach fading aligns with the comfort level of the business too. And that, with that being said, with Erin, or the employment specialist, really encouraging or coming up with a plan to develop either other tools or trainings for the coworkers to continue the job coach to be able to fade, and to teach the business how to develop or build capacity to help support Stacy and her job. So the next client that we're going to talk about, Jonathan, and we started working with Jonathan while he was still within his transition program. Actually, we did the work side by side with his transition team. So we few things to highlight about Jonathan. He really enjoys rhythm and music. He is a guy that likes to have things in order. So if he was in a room and saw a pen on the floor, he would like to pick up the pen and put it on the desk with the other pens. He uses a communication device, and he has a strong connection with the Jewish faith and with Jewish traditions.
And he had some nice work training experiences in the time that he was in transition. So that really helped us with discovery. You know, we were able to really tap into those experiences and see what worked, what didn't, what kinds of environments he would fit into well. And this is really important because Jonathan's nonverbal, and so we had to go by, observations, and really had to. We're very thankful that we had the opportunity to interview people who knew him well and who saw him in a variety of different settings and in different environments.
So the 3 areas that we focused on when job developing for him was movement. Jonathan is a type of guy that, his brain really starts to be engaged when his body is moving and he's being physically active. He also is really, really skilled at organizing and sorting. For example, I went and observed him at a speech therapy, and in the waiting room when he was waiting for a speech therapist, he put away all the Legos to where they needed to into their container. He put away all the books, and he straightened all the chairs. So he just has this affinity for keeping things in their place. And like I said before, we worked side by side with the transition team with completing the discovery process, along with the job coaching and developing the follow-along support plan. So we're going to go through a little bit about what that looks like working with the transition team and how we were able to create a plan for a seamless transition for Jonathan with his support person.
Yeah.
So these, again, just highlights what we learned about Jonathan during that discovery phase. And a good thing to note is that we identified that about an hour is an ideal work shift for him. It's about his attention span for how long he can focus. And we also identified, everyone agreed, the transition team is family, and total length, that a one-on-one support, personal support worker would benefit Jonathan in the work world after he was done with his supports that he received from school.
I think, and I'm not really, I think this is important here in the state of Illinois. I don't know how it works for the rest of you. They're in other parts of the country, but in the state of Illinois, we still don't have in place waivers and things that include how a personal support worker can be part of someone's workday. We're working on that. But this was a real important conversation, and we're just sharing this with you because this has been a process for us. Again, Jonathan was one of our first clients, but the family had a very strong intention to continue to challenge him intellectually and to have high expectations for him. And so they receive home and community-based, what's called home and community-based waiver funding money here. So they have the ability to decide how to use that funding, and they use part of that funding to pay for a personal support worker. The personal support worker is someone who Jonathan has known for almost his whole life, and so this is good. There are parts of that relationship that makes this a good fit, and parts of that relationship that were potentially challenging in this situation, because Jonathan's relationships with people and what those look like and what they do together define a routine for him. And as you can tell by what we've talked about, routines are really important. So we really had to create a plan for his personal support worker, Liz, to play a very different role in his life, and so she actually had to learn how to interact with him and communicate with him in a very different way than she had before. So this case is really one that proves the point of how important collaboration is, and we learned so much collaborating with everyone on Jonathan's behalf.
So through job development, we identified two great locations. One was at a private Jewish high school where he started to work 2 days a week for an hour, and our local YMCA where he worked 2 days a week for an hour and a half. And really different routines were created for him at each location. At the Jewish high school, he helped to organize and their prayer books and their sanctuary, along with helped do a few different tasks within their gym and in their cafeteria and in their library and their computer room.
And some classrooms too, right? Yeah, I mean, they really Emily and the staff from the transition program really created a very a routine that really made sense for Jonathan in the way that he likes to be active, the way that he likes to be physically active, and the way that he kind of likes to move through a physical space.
And then his work at the YMCA, he travels around the facility and collects their recyclables. So he travels to each recycling bin, collects them, and then takes them out to a specific bin designated for them to be picked up and recycled. And so both of these routines really focused on his wish to be active and moving, and
to even move around a physical building in a pattern. So this team worked so hard to create this routine. It's yeah, I'm just really thrilled to be able to share, how this all came together. But we really learned more and more how the work routine and establishing the work routine for Jonathan in many ways became somewhat therapeutic for him because there was some consistency and there was a routine, and those types of routines are things that really put him at ease.
And Jonathan started both of these work opportunities during his last year in transition. So about 8 months before he graduated, he started to paid employment with both the Y and the private Jewish high school. And so part of his transition plan or follow-along support plan was how to transition out that school staff and transition in his personal support worker. So that he could keep his routine and feeling comfortable in the consistency to his day-to-day life. So we started training with the transition team, Jonathan's personal support worker, about 4 months before his graduation. And we shared the responsibility with the transition team in training Liz, the personal support worker, with the idea that after school was done, Total Link would continue to help provide an additional layer of support to that personal support worker and Jonathan. So Liz, the personal support worker, started with simply observing Jonathan's routine in both of these locations. And this was important for her to learn the way to best assist Jonathan within his job as the role of more like a job coach versus somebody doing fun recreational things with him like she'd been used to doing in the past. So the first section of her training was to observe and to become familiar with the job sites and with Jonathan's routine. From there was another section of her training where she was able to be the lead with Jonathan, be the one doing the communicating with Jonathan or giving the directions, and having somebody else on site with her and Jonathan to provide support or to answer questions or to help if anything got tricky. The next layer of support was, or the next thing in Liz's training was to work with Jonathan without another staff member present, and but to have somebody available by phone in case they needed help. And then the last step, or how we're currently working with Liz and Jonathan, is we have regular check-ins with them to see how everything's going, and they know that they can always reach out to us to problem solve or to help teach Jonathan anything new, or to meet with anybody at the high school or the Y to support Jonathan.
So this is just a set of lessons that we thought we would share with you that have helped us to kind of look when we go into a place where someone works and to try to imagine what it's going to look like when we're not there. So we try to be very intentional and identify natural supports, look at accommodations that need to be made. And as Emily said, you know, job coaching is a dynamic process. Sometimes even after we're there, we will change tasks or routines, even things that look like, you know, they should be a go. Sometimes when you get there, for some reason or another, we find out that either that's a task that doesn't need to be done anymore, or for whatever reason, maybe maybe that individual, it's just not a good fit for that person. So have it in mind what you want to do, but at the same time, be open and be flexible. So we really want to make sure, especially with some of the clients that we work with who tend to memorize their routines, not everyone, but I think some of the people that we talked about today, they kind of, we kind of intentionally set up a routine that they can learn and practice, feel confident in, and then become independent as much as possible. So being physically present for the teaching is an important part of it, and it can be a little bit tricky because, again, we don't want to be a cue for our clients that they need us there to do their work, but we're there to teach. Almost everyone that we talked about today, it requires more than, you know, modeling. It requires more than that. And we want to be sure that when someone learns something, they're learning it the right way, and they're not picking up or adding steps that might be problematic. So, for instance, the only thing I can think of is, to clarify this, is somebody that we provided some job coaching for this summer. There was a break for this young man where he had a job and he was still in transition. His family wanted him to continue working. He was working in a grocery store. And there was about a 6-week period where he was going to need some job coaching. He was just right in the middle of learning these tasks. And one of the things that we noticed while we were there, he had picked up a couple of funny habits. So he was going through a large grocery store and cleaning the large glass refrigerated doors. And for whatever reason, he picked up kind of a silly habit of knocking on the glass door before he cleaned it. And that might sound like a silly thing to nitpick, but I guess there were some issues with it, and it became a point where he would kind of get silly. We had to figure out a way to kind of systematically take that step out of what he did. And there were a couple other things kind of with like his work supplies and things that he kept in his cart that he kind of brought with him to the store. So anyway, that was an example of something that he inserted into his routine that really wasn't so great because the store managers didn't like to see him kind of knocking or pounding hard on the glass doors. So that's just an example, I think, of the little things that can kind of be inserted, and that's why that full physical presence in the beginning is important, so that we see someone has learned how to do all the steps of a routine or of certain tasks in the right way. So
Here's some indicators for knowing of when you can step back and that next step of fading. If the employee is hitting their benchmarks, if they're on track in their routine, if they have identified and feel comfortable going to a fellow coworker to ask questions, that they know who that coworker is. They know that if that coworker is in a meeting, who else can they go to ask a question. So when you see the employee on task in their routine and utilizing other natural supports, it's a good indication that you can take that next step of fading because the job coach really isn't needed anymore, and that's what you want to see. You want to be intentional with that fading while you're building that natural support. Another great indicator is kind of to do some intentional checking. So maybe planting a small problem to see how they problem solve it, or what they do to solve a problem when the job coach isn't around.
Who they go to, how they respond to that little glitch, and those are things that are really definitely important to do. The other thing, especially if you're working with young adults who haven't really had much work experience, there's a honeymoon phase. That probably happens for all of us when we start a new job, where we really kind of put our best foot forward. We have to be very conscientious and intentional to learn that task, those sets of tasks. And this isn't true for anyone, but we found that with quite a number of our young adults, they kind of will tend to slide maybe after 3 to 6 months. And so knowing that and keeping that in the back of your mind and checking in with their supervisor and going in very sporadically at variable, unexpected and variable times to check in, it's a very good way to help people kind of bring that level of performance back up if that tends to happen.
And another thing is by planting a small problem or a small issue that the employee has to problem solve, it's also a great way to see how their natural support handles the situation and see if there's maybe some further teaching that would be helpful for the employee's coworkers to know. So I think just a few key things to keep in mind when developing your following along support plan is kind of be ready or be willing to go back into the job site when something comes up, so that the business might want to teach the individual something new and would greatly appreciate the job coach support. Make sure the business has your contact information and people are the best way to get a hold of you. And continue to communicate both with your client and with the business.
So a follow-along support plan is something that we, I think in the back of our minds, we had done some of this work, but it was through the use of the IPS model that we have decided to create a very written, specific follow-along support plan. And it's so helpful because this is something that's proactive. So say, for instance, a supervisor leaves, and this happens. We had this happen recently with a couple of our clients who had just started a job, and within less than 2 months of starting and us getting ready to fade, the supervisor changed. So really spelling out all the supports that you've put in place and putting those in a support plan is a real helpful thing to do. It's also, you can call a support plan kind of and ask for some reasonable accommodations as well. So we kind of look at it in that way. And so, for instance, even one of our clients last week or a couple weeks ago who works in a bakery forgot to bring her shoes with her. And she really needs to have the right kind of shoes. It's dangerous and it's a hazard if she doesn't have the right kind of shoes. So one of the things that we put into her support plan is that she leaves a pair of work shoes at work, because when she got to work this last time and had her boots on with 3-inch heels, they were flexible with her and they let her stay. So even things like that, pieces of the uniform and where those pieces of the uniform are going to be, if someone has a tendency to need directions written? Is there something about how they need to be written? Some of our clients need things to be in a larger font. These are all little things that you can put in a support plan that are proactive, and that I think it really builds that consistent communication amongst everyone, so that, and including parents, so parents know. I think parents appreciate it as well. They can talk. It gives them a point of reference to use when they're talking to their young adult at home about, what's happening at work as well.
And putting it in a written form and going over, the piece of paper and what it says of the business, I have found really helps certain companies feel at ease, because they feel like, okay, if, this happens, here's my plan. And it just kind of makes everyone feel comfortable, or it helps the business feel comfortable asking other questions. I've had a company say, okay, well, if so-and-so doesn't come back from lunch, what should I do? And so you can put in the support plan concerns or questions of the business as well. And so it's just a nice document to have to create discussions and for everyone to know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the next two slides just go over key points of things that Janice and I have talked about today. It's really important during that phase 1 of job coaching to really break down those tasks into teachable steps for the client, and providing any visual supports or written directions or accommodations for that task to help the client be independent in completing them. During that first phase 2, identifying who those natural supports are and building the relationship between our client or the business's new employee and their supervisor or their go-to person at work is critical, so that as the job coach or as you start to fade, that a good working relationship has been established between the two. Remembering that job coaching is dynamic, we can be hands-on helping during the first task, and then we can fade away during the second task, all depending on the support needs of the individual. And it doesn't hurt, or it always helps when we can teach our clients to double check their own work. Sometimes it becomes the job coaching role to provide this extra set of double checking to make sure there's a quality to the work, and oftentimes it's an easy step for our clients to do as well.
And we try to do it with almost everybody as much as we can, because even our clients who are so meticulous and tedious, they could be off one day because they're not feeling well. So creating a way for them to double check their work whenever possible is even if you think someone can't do it, we strongly encourage you to try to set something up. And you'd be so surprised to see once somebody becomes comfortable in their routine and they're confident, I think almost everybody that we work with has the ability to go back and check their work.
And that's something that we naturally do within our work always. You read an email, you read through it to make sure it says everything that you wanted to say. And it's often a step that we forget to teach others to do, that double check. Keep the communication open, schedule regular check-ins with the supervisors or the coworkers, whether that's through a phone call or stopping into the businesses. Keeping that line open for people to engage in conversation, really helps solve problems before they become too big of problems.
And some people will prefer email, so I would even ask, a supervisor or supervisors, how would you prefer for us to keep in touch? And we have a lot of people that are doing great and have been in their jobs for a long time. We don't hear anything. No news is good news, but at the same time, if you can even put it on your calendar, check in with XYZ company, even if it's just sending out an email to say hello and say hi, how are things going? Just wanted to see how so-and-so is doing, and if you're still, if there's anything that we can help you with.
So the next couple of bullet points, we just want to share that we understand that job coaching, or at least here in our part of the country, in Illinois, kind of becomes a tricky business because there's not always funding available for it. It could be considered time intensive. And so we just kind of wanted to highlight successful ways that we've gone about the work, and that's setting someone up for success in their job by starting with, let's say, a couple hours or 3 hours, a few days a week. And as our client becomes independent in their routine and the job coach is able to fade away, then adding on additional hours to their work schedule or additional days per week.
Right. And and if you're someone who is managing and supervising a staff, we think about how people have a certain numbers of clients on their case. Our employment specialists also happen to do job coaching. We almost all do it, and sometimes we don't know when someone's going to need extra job coaching. Given the project that we have and the funding that we have right now, I tell our employment specialists to see themselves, and this is kind of stressful, to see themselves out of the picture in 4 to 6 weeks. Now that doesn't happen, that happens sometimes, but not all the time. And you can keep people's schedules more open by starting with few hours. It's also something that we've had a few clients who have left school without a job, and they're sitting at home. They may be a couple days of the day program, but they've gotten really comfortable at home. And to bring them back to a place where there's expectations and to get used to that, again, starting with fewer hours and building is something that works really well, not only on our end with our staff, but also for some of our clients, and especially those who haven't been used to working for a while.
So we're at the end of our presentation, and we'd be so happy to answer questions about things that we've said or hear what job coaching strategies have been successful for you guys.
We would love to hear what types of strategies you all have used, and we have worked with such a wide range of clients who needed a wide variety of different types of support. So please, share your questions, or even if you're problem solving with someone that you're coaching right now, we would love to hear from you.
And then one other reminder, the 2 videos that we've included are really great and helpful.
Information,
so if you guys get a chance,
Emily and Janice. If you have specific questions, feel free to use the chat box to ask the questions. I have a question for you guys. As you're presenting, it seems to me that developing relationships and expectations is a critical component with the business, is a critical component of job coach fading. So can you just briefly address how you set that up from the get-go? When you're talking to employers, what's the expectation you present to them about job coaching? Do you outline exactly what you're going to be doing, so on and so forth?
We do. We absolutely do. So when we make that first visit on behalf of someone, if we think it's potentially a fit for one of our clients, we talk about how the business is a client, and we set them up for success by really teaching those core tasks or routines, and then also by and we call that job coaching. And then we also explain that we're going to work with your staff to help your staff feel comfortable and know how to support the employee. And we're very intentional with follow-up separate from the work time with the supervisor. We found that to be really important, because sometimes if a company hasn't hired someone before who has some of the communication challenges that our clients have, they're really not quite sure how to approach someone. So even if we've modeled, sometimes it's easier to have a conversation about how direct to be with someone in a separate conversation outside of the work training situation.
Mm-hmm. And you're exactly right, Tim. We do, from that first meeting, say, you know, when we're explaining Total Link and our role, we'll say, you know, we'll be providing a job coach to, one, help the individual learn their job, and two, to help your business learn how to support them so that our job coach can eventually fade out of here. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we, you know, just flat out say in a matter of fact way, but stated in a way that says, you know, here's the help that we can provide you to build capacity.
Any other
to
questions?
help your new employee. So that's correct.
Looks like we have a quiet group today, so feel free to use the chat box if you have specific questions. Doesn't look like.
And I'm realizing, yeah, I'm realizing that our contact information isn't on here, so I'll go ahead and put Total Link's email address, and if you guys think of questions at a later date.
Thank you for your time, Emily and Janice. Really good information. And for those of you online, this webinar has been recorded, and I'll archive it on the USET webpage for if you have other staff that would like to watch this video. Really good information. Please take a second and list any topics that you would like for future webinars in the poll box that I just posted on top. Just type in your answers, and hopefully you can give me some ideas for future webinars. Emily and Janice, I appreciate your time, and enjoy the beginning of spring. Thanks.